I heard the applause before I even stepped onto the stage. But not from her. Not from the woman who gave birth to me, raised me, fed me mediocrity with a silver spoon, and called it love. She sat in the third row, arms folded, lips pressed so tight they almost disappeared into her skin. Everyone else was on their feet. Cameras flashed. The president's voice still echoed behind me, my name announced with that crisp clarity usually reserved for generals and Nobel winners. But my mother, she didn't clap. I remember thinking, even now she can't do it. I stood there, heart punching through my ribs, remembering the first time she told me I'd never amount to anything. I was 8. I brought home a crayon drawing of a bookstore I said I'd own one day. She looked at it then at me and said, "You should aim for something more achievable. You'll always be average, sweetie. That's okay." Average. A word like a wet blanket, heavy, smothering. And yet here I was. Applause, spotlight, presidential acknowledgement. Not for who I was in her kitchen, but for who I became when I stopped eating her shame like it was dinner. I squinted into the crowd. A sea of strangers, dignitaries, people who had read my book and whispered that it saved their marriage or shattered their silence or made them cry in a way they hadn't in decades. And her, still not clapping. Only when I stepped down, walking past the edge of the carpet, did she finally move. She stood and walked out without a word. The cameras caught it. Of course they did. The woman who raised me leaving the room just as I was being honored by the president. I didn't follow her. I just watched the door swing shut, thinking I should be used to this by now. But I wasn't. Because what she didn't know, what nobody knew, was that none of this started with ambition. Not the award, not the book, not the viral interviews. It started with betrayal, with secrets that sat rotting inside the walls of our perfect-looking family. It started the day I learned the one thing I was never supposed to know. It started the moment my stepfather walked into my bedroom without knocking, and didn't leave. My stepfather, Alan, was a quiet man. The kind of quiet that didn't raise concern, just a steady hum in the background of a life built around my mother's sharp voice and sharper expectations. I never feared him, but I never fully trusted him either. We weren't close. Not in the way some girls get with their stepdads in movies or therapy stories. He was my mom's second husband, married into our lives when I was 12. I called him Alan, not Dad. He never asked for more, but he noticed things my mother never saw. Like when I got the flu the week before junior prom and stayed home alone in bed. She didn't cancel her dinner with her book club or leave me a note. Just said there's soup in the freezer if you get hungry. It was Alan who showed up around noon. I heated the soup, he said, placing the tray gently on my nightstand. Chicken noodle, real steam, not the microwave kind. I blinked at him. You didn't have to. He shrugged. I know. He sat on the edge of my bed watching me sip. I was 16. Sick. Worn down. And for a minute, just a minute, I let myself feel grateful. He asked about my schoolwork, my books, my drawings. I told him I didn't show them to Mom anymore because she made me feel stupid. He said she's always been tough on you. Too tough. I remember blinking at him, stunned. No one had ever said that out loud before. He kept talking, quietly, carefully, as if we were two soldiers on the same side of a silent war. My heart, feverish and frail, fluttered at the sudden warmth of it, not romantic, not yet. Just attention, genuine attention. Looking back, that was the first line crossed. Not the soup, not the soft conversation, but that moment when I realized someone in the house saw me. And I let myself need it. He left after 15 minutes, said get some rest, kiddo, and closed the door behind him. But after that, something shifted. Subtle at first. The way he'd linger in the kitchen if I was there. How he'd make sure I had a ride home from school. How he'd catch my eye when Mom said something cruel, like he was silently apologizing for her. At 17, I would have told you it was harmless. I would have told you I was imagining it. Until the night of the thunderstorm. The night he sat too close. The night I should have gotten up and walked away, but didn't. It was one of those southern spring storms that rolls in slow, then explodes all at once. Thick air sky like wet cotton thunder that rattles inside your chest. Mom was out. Some women's conference in Atlanta. Said she wouldn't be home until after midnight. She barely looked at me when she left, just tossed her keys in her purse and warned, don't touch the thermostat. I was 17, home alone. Except I wasn't. The rain started around 8. I was in the den, curled up on the couch with a book I wouldn't remember later. Alan came in around 9, holding 2 mugs of tea. Figured we might lose power, he said. I didn't answer, just took the tea. He sat on the other end of the couch. For a while, we just listened, the kind of silence that pretends it isn't charged. Then the lights flickered, went out, a sharp, violent pop. We both gasped. He laughed a little, not amused, just startled. "See," he said, "told you." The room went quiet, except for the wind pressing against the house like a hand trying to break in. I lit the candle on the coffee table. Vanilla and citrus. Too sweet. The flame cast shadows that made his face look softer than I remembered. We talked at first about nothing. My schoolwork, his favorite authors, what he wanted to be when he was young. "A poet," he said. I laughed. "Seriously?" "Dead serious," he smiled. "But life had other plans." I nodded. I knew about life's plans. Then the silence. That long, aching kind that wraps around you when you're too tired to keep pretending nothing is wrong. His voice came low. "You know, I always thought you were remarkable." The candle crackled. I froze. "Your mother doesn't see it," he said. "But I do. I've always seen it." I didn't answer. My heartbeat filled the room. His hand moved slow, deliberate, rested on mine. I didn't pull away. God help me, I didn't move at all. I let his thumb trace the line of my wrist. My breath went shallow. My cheeks burned. I told myself it was curiosity. I told myself it was comfort. I told myself nothing happened. But everything happened. Because once you let someone blur a line like that, once you feel something you weren't supposed to feel, the damage is already done. Even if nothing else touches skin. Even if the lights come back on 2 minutes later, and you snatch your hand away like it was all just some strange misunderstanding, you still know what happened in the dark. And so do they. The next morning, I woke to sunlight and silence. Alan had already left for work. My mother returned around noon, dragging her suitcase behind her like a corpse. She barely glanced at me, just muttered something about traffic and poured herself a glass of wine before lunch. I sat at the kitchen table, fingers trembling around a mug of coffee I didn't even want. Every time the front door creaked or a car passed outside, I jumped. Not because I thought he'd say something, but because I was terrified he wouldn't. And I was right. He didn't. Not that day. Not the next. Not for weeks. But his silence was louder than any words. He looked at me longer, walked slower when we passed in the hall, started sitting at the kitchen island instead of across from me, closer. Always closer. And I became split in two. One version of me hated him. Despised the sick flutter in my stomach, the heat that bloomed under my skin when I caught his eyes. I told myself he was a predator, that I was a victim. But the other version, the one I never told anyone about, didn't feel like a victim. That version felt wanted, powerful, special, which made me hate myself even more. I started withdrawing at school, skipping lunches, getting stomach aches I couldn't explain. My friends asked if I was okay. I wasn't, but I smiled anyway. One night, I overheard Mom on the phone with her sister. "She's always been dramatic," she said. "She wants attention. She thinks life is supposed to bend for her. She's just average. Always has been." That word again, like a ghost that wouldn't leave the room. That night, I burned my sketchbook. Every drawing I'd ever made. Every bookstore I imagined myself owning. I watched the paper curl and blacken in the backyard grill, convinced I deserved whatever I got. Because maybe if I hadn't been lonely, maybe if I hadn't been so hungry for affection, maybe then I wouldn't have let his hand rest there so long in the dark. But I did. And the shame of it stuck to my skin like the smoke from those ashes. That's when I started writing. At night, in secret, not essays, not fiction, confessions, page after page, half memory, half therapy. I never meant to turn it into a book. But the truth has a way of rotting if you don't give it air. And mine was beginning to stink. It was never meant to be read. The red spiral-bound notebook lived beneath a floorboard under my bed, nestled between a loose board and an old shoebox of cassette tapes I never listened to. My handwriting scrawled in fits, sometimes messy, rushed angry. Other times meticulous, slow confessional. I wrote everything. The soup, the storm, the touch, the silence that followed. Even the parts I hated to remember, especially those. I wrote things I didn't even know I believed until I saw them on the page. Like how I'd longed for someone to notice me. How Alan had felt like a lighthouse even if he was also a storm. How I had started feeling complicit. Like maybe I invited it, like maybe I wanted it. I knew it wasn't love, but it wasn't entirely hate either. That was the part that made it so unbearable. I poured it all out because I had nowhere else to put it. Until one afternoon, 2 months after the storm, I came home from school to the smell of smoke. Not dinner, not a candle, burning paper, and Mom standing by the kitchen sink, the stainless steel bin next to her still smoldering. Her hands were blackened at the edges, her face something between fury and satisfaction. "I found your little diary," she said flatly. "Don't worry, I read enough." My heart lodged in my throat. I stepped forward shaking. "You, why would you?" "Why would I what?" "Go through your things. I pay the mortgage on that house. That bed, that floor. You think you get to have secrets from me in my house." I couldn't breathe. "You had no right." She threw a charred piece of the notebook at me. It disintegrated in the air. "You think I don't know what you're doing? Trying to make him the bad guy? Trying to make me feel like I failed? I gave you everything, and you write filth like that." I was shaking now. "It's not filth, it's the truth." Her face twisted. "No, it's a lie you wanted to be true. You always wanted attention. You've always been pathetic. You were never strong, never special. I knew it from the day you were born. You were going to be average, and you are." I stood there, every nerve on fire. But something inside me, something small, fragile, long asleep, finally woke up. "I'm not," I said, barely above a whisper. "What?" "I'm not average," I said louder. She rolled her eyes and turned away, dismissing me like she always had. That night I packed a bag. I had no plan, no money, no safety net. Just rage and a drive I'd never felt before. I left a note on the kitchen table. "You'll read my words again someday. But not because you found them, because the whole world will." I was 18, alone. And the only thing I had left was the truth still burning in my head. So I ran toward it. I moved into a basement apartment behind a laundromat 2 towns over. The ceiling leaked. The radiator screamed every morning like it was being exorcised. There were 3 dead spiders in the corner of the bathroom when I arrived, and I named them all just to feel less alone. But it was mine. No one slammed doors there. No one read my thoughts and set them on fire. No one touched me without asking. I worked at a diner on the edge of town, the kind with sticky menus and a coffee pot older than the Constitution. I cleared tables, refilled mugs, smiled at truckers and sad-eyed women who looked like older versions of me. At night I wrote, not in a notebook this time, on a cheap secondhand laptop I bought with my first paycheck. Every night I came home and poured my memories into Word documents labeled grocery list and budget plan, so no one could accuse me of oversharing again. I wrote everything, what happened, what didn't, what I wish I'd said. I fictionalized names, bent facts, added moments I could control because, in real life, I had never been in control. I didn't know it was a book. Not yet. I just knew I had to write it, or it would keep living in me, clawing its way out through dreams and panic attacks and the impulse to scream whenever someone called me sweetheart. 3 months in, I met Malcolm. He was the overnight delivery driver for a local bookstore. Dropped off crates of paperbacks at the diner for some arrangement I never really understood. He had tattoos that peeked out from under his sleeves and eyes that looked like they'd been hurt before but didn't pretend otherwise. One night he lingered. I was cleaning the counter. He said, "You always look like you're somewhere else." I said, "That's probably where I belong." He didn't push, just nodded. Over time we talked, mostly about books. He loved Steinbeck. I loved Plath. We argued over endings and character flaws and the difference between tragedy and cruelty. One night I told him the plot of my grocery list document. I didn't say it was mine. I just told him the story. He didn't flinch. He said, "That doesn't sound average to me." And I broke. Right there in the back booth next to the jukebox. Quiet tears. The kind that come when someone sees you and doesn't look away. He walked me home. Didn't touch me. Didn't ask to come in. Just said, "Keep writing. Someone's going to need that story one day." He was wrong, though. Millions would need it. But that came later. First came the mistake. The relapse. The phone call I never should have answered. From Ellen. I should have let it ring. Should have thrown the burner phone across the room and let it die beneath the radiator. But I didn't. Because it was a Tuesday night and the rain was coming down again, thick, slow, memory-laced. I'd just burned dinner and cried watching an old voicemail from Malcolm. He'd left town 2 weeks earlier for a job in Detroit. We promised to keep in touch. We didn't. So when I saw the number, a ghost from my old area code, something in me paused, then answered. I didn't say anything. Neither did he. Just breath. "Then you're safe." It was Alan's voice. Older, rougher, but unmistakable. I froze. "I just needed to hear your voice," he continued. "Your mom, she told everyone you ran off with a boy. Said you were always dramatic. But I knew it wasn't that simple." My chest tightened. "What do you want?" "To explain." "You don't get to explain." "I think I do," he said gently. "You said it yourself in that journal, that you were confused, that you didn't know where the line was. My blood ran cold. You read it. She showed it to me before she burned it, said you'd gone off the rails. I couldn't speak. You weren't wrong, you know, about how lonely it felt in that house, about how invisible you were. I saw it too. I tried to fix it the only way I knew how. That wasn't fixing, I whispered. That was breaking. He sighed. I know. I think about you every day. I miss you. There it was. That terrible, dangerous word. Miss. I should have hung up. Should have screamed. But instead I said, you're married to my mother. He paused. I haven't touched her since you left. Not once. The words slithered into me like a drug I swore I'd quit. My hands shook. My mouth went dry. I hated myself for the flicker of warmth that sparked in my stomach, for the part of me that needed someone to say they chose me even if it was wrong. Don't call again, I said. And I meant it. But he had already reopened something. And in the days that followed, I found myself writing differently. Less confession. More obsession. The line between truth and fiction blurred. In one draft, the girl leaves and never looks back. In another, she returns. And that's the one that went viral. Because when I posted an excerpt online, just one had exploded. Thousands of comments, DMs, emails, people telling me they knew that house, that silence, that twisted longing. People begging for more. But the more I gave them, the more I had to remember. And remembering meant confronting the ugliest truth of all. I hadn't just run from my mother. I had run from myself. The first publisher that responded to my manuscript sent me a 3-line email. The writing is strong, but the material may be too raw for our audience. Perhaps with some edits, a softer tone. Let us know if you're open to revisions. Softer tone. I had bled on every page. There was no softening the moment a grown man slipped his hand onto mine in the dark, or the way a mother could silence a daughter with just a single well-placed insult. So I didn't revise. I sharpened. I went back and made it messier, more human. I added the things I'd been too afraid to admit the first time, how I sometimes missed him, how part of me liked being chosen even if it made me feel monstrous, how I wondered late at night if I'd confused trauma for love, and what that said about me. And then I posted it. Not a manuscript, not a pitch. Just me reading it out loud on a live video at 2 a.m., sitting on the floor of my moldy basement apartment, wrapped in a blanket, trembling like a confession was a crime. By sunrise, the video had over 1 million views. Women messaged me from Idaho, from New York, from Alabama, from places I'd never even heard of. Women who had lived in silences of their own. Women who had blurred the lines. Women who had been groomed, gaslit, overlooked, praised for their politeness, punished for their truths. The hashtags took over. Not average, our her story is mine. Burned but not broken. A month later, I got the second email. From a woman named Lee Templeton, an independent publisher. She wrote, "This is what the world needs. Raw, ugly, honest. Let's not tame it. Let's put a spotlight on it." I cried reading that line. She offered me a modest advance and full creative control. I signed without blinking. And just like that, my story, the one my mother tried to destroy, the one Alan called Confused, became a book. We titled it The Candle Went Out, But I Didn't Move. It hit shelves 3 months later, and then the morning show appearances began. The interviews, the book clubs, the angry letters from suburban moms who called me a liar. And then the president's office reached out. A national honor for literary courage and survivor advocacy. I thought it was a prank. Until the flight tickets arrived. Until the program was printed. Until I stood in that auditorium, the president reading my name from the podium. And saw her, my mother, 3rd row, stone-faced, silent. And then I watched her stand up and walk out. She didn't call after the ceremony, but 2 days later I got a letter, handwritten, postmarked from my hometown. The envelope was cream-colored expensive. No return address, but the handwriting was unmistakable, tight-slanted, impatient. Inside were 5 words written at the top. "You embarrassed the entire family. No dear, no love, just blame." She went on for 2 pages, double-sided. Told me how my little story made neighbors whisper. How she couldn't go to church without getting looks. How my cousin's employer asked whether our family had a history of mental illness. And then the sentence that made my stomach lurch. "You always had a flair for drama, but dragging Alan into this, he loved you. He loved you." Those words sat on the page like poison. She wasn't angry that he crossed a line. She was angry that I'd spoken. I folded the letter and dropped it in the trash. But it didn't stay there. Because later that night, I pulled it back out, read it again, this time aloud, and filmed it. Just me, sitting at my desk, reading her cruelty like scripture, then looking into the lens and saying, if I embarrassed the family by surviving, then the family needed to be embarrassed. The video reached 6.3 million views in 48 hours. And then the floodgates opened again. More women, more stories. But also threats. Emails from men calling me a liar, telling me Alan was a good man. One even said he didn't force you, so what's the problem? As if consent were a binary. As if shame couldn't creep in, slow disguised as attention disguised as praise. As if silence hadn't been their favorite tool all along. But I didn't back down. Not this time. I wrote op-eds, sat on panels, told the world the part I hadn't put in the book, the part I had written, then deleted, then written again. I was a child. He was not. I didn't seduce anyone. I adapted to survive, and I will never be silent again. A week after that interview aired, I received another letter. This one wasn't from my mother. It was from Alan. Typed. No signature. Just 2 sentences. I see now what I was, and I pray to God you never forgive me. I stared at it for a long time, and then I smiled, because that was the only thing I had ever wanted from him. An admission. Not love. Not redemption. Just truth. And finally, after all those years, I had it. It was bound to happen. When the paperback release hit, the publisher asked if I'd do a small tour, just 5 cities. One of them was my hometown. Lee was delicate when she brought it up. We can skip it if you want, she said. But there's a big indie bookstore there that wants to host you. Apparently, you've sold more copies in your hometown than anywhere else. I almost laughed. Of course they did. People always love scandal more when it's local. I told her yes, and then spent the next 3 weeks rehearsing what I'd do if she showed up. My mother, I imagined her face stiff with disapproval, clutching her pearls like they could shield her from my words. I imagined myself reading a passage that would make her squirm, or maybe walking past her without flinching, maybe even hugging her, or screaming. But none of it happened, because she didn't come. Not to the reading, not to the signing. Not even to lurk in the corner like a specter with a purse full of judgments. She didn't show, but someone else did. Her neighbor, Mrs. Bram. I recognized her immediately. The wide hips, the floral scarf, the kind of lipstick that left prints on your cheeks for hours. When she reached the signing table, her hands were trembling. She didn't ask for a personalized signature. She just said, I always thought something was wrong in that house. I never knew how to ask. I swallowed. She leaned closer, lowered her voice. Your mother made you small. You grew anyway. I hope you know that's a miracle. And I, the woman who had just signed a book deal in 5 countries, felt 16 again. Seen. Finally, she said, she's still in that house, you know. Still keeps your photo on the mantle. Still tells people you're off writing stories. Stories, I repeated. Mrs. Bram nodded. But she watches everything, every interview, every article. She knows you're not average anymore, and it's killing her. I smiled, not out of malice, but because for the first time I didn't care. I wasn't writing for her anymore. I never really had. That night I drove past the house. The porch light was on, the same sagging swing, the same blue hydrangeas she kept alive like it proved something. I didn't stop, didn't knock, didn't need to, because everything she ever told me about limits, about shame, about what I'd never become, had just been drowned out by a different voice. Mine, and that voice was only getting louder. It happened in a grocery store in Chicago. I was there for another book panel, rushing to grab almond milk and a pre-made sandwich before hiding in my hotel for the night. Fame was strange. It didn't follow you everywhere, just showed up when you least expected it. She approached me near the checkout line, maybe mid-40s, brown hair in a messy bun, eyes like she'd run out of sleep 2 years ago. She didn't ask for a selfie. She didn't even say hello at first. She just placed her hand on my arm and said softly, You said what I couldn't. I didn't know what to say, so I just nodded throat tight. Then she added, You were so brave? I blinked, because brave wasn't a word I recognized for myself. Not really. I'd heard that angry, difficult, attention-seeking, dangerous, overdramatic, but never brave. I managed to whisper, Thank you. She smiled, eyes glassy, and said I burned my journals too. I never thought anyone would write something like yours. My husband read it. He cried. For the first time in 20 years, he asked me what I'd been through. I told him. Then she squeezed my hand. And left. Just like that. And I stood in the checkout line holding almond milk tears in my eyes, wondering how many women had been walking through their lives carrying rooms of silence inside them, rooms they thought they'd be buried in. That's when I knew the book wasn't mine anymore. It belonged to them now. To every girl who whispered confessions to a bedroom wall and called it safety. To every woman who learned to live inside herself because the world never made space for her truth. And yes, even to the ones like me who sometimes confused a hand on theirs for love. especially those. That night, I opened a new document on my laptop. Title Brave Girls Don't Always Scream. It would be my second book. More stories. Stories like mine. Stories not like mine. All tangled in the same root system of silence and survival. I knew it would cost me. The first one already had. But when I clicked save, I didn't feel afraid. I felt clean. Because there's a power in naming the thing that tried to break you. And mine, it had a name. It had a face. But it no longer had control. The news came on a Thursday. A voicemail from an unfamiliar number. A woman speaking slowly, carefully, like she was reading instructions from a grief manual. Alan had died in his sleep. Cardiac arrest. No foul play, no will, no next of kin, except me, apparently. My mother had refused to make arrangements, left it all to the county. I sat on the edge of my hotel bed phone, still warm in my hand heart, completely still. No tears. No rage. Just silence. Is that what justice looked like? A man dying alone in a rented one-bedroom apartment, with a half-packed suitcase still open at the foot of his bed. According to the woman from the county office, he was planning to move somewhere new. But he never made it out the door. A few reporters caught wind of the connection. Former stepfather of best-selling author found dead. Author's memoir had accused him of emotional manipulation. No charges were ever filed. They reached out for comment. I declined. Because what was I supposed to say? That part of me wanted to believe he read my second book and saw himself in the villain. That I hoped, cruel as it sounds, he felt regret. That sometimes late at night I still remembered how I didn't pull my hand away. No, I said nothing. I did, however, attend the burial. Not to mourn him, but to stand at the edge of the plot and see with my own eyes that he was gone. The grave was modest, no service, no flowers. Just me, a biting wind, and the funeral director looking at me like I might collapse. I didn't. I stood tall, gloved hands in my coat pockets, watching the casket lower like it was a secret finally sinking. As I turned to leave, I noticed something tucked behind the headstone, a letter. No envelope, just folded paper yellowed and soft at the edges. Written in my mother's handwriting. One line only? You ruined 2 lives. Was it worth it? I didn't take the note. Didn't need to. Because I already knew the answer. I whispered it as I walked back to the car. Yes, because the truth doesn't ruin lives. It exposes the rot. It gives the rest of us permission to rebuild. I drove away from that grave with the windows down, wind ripping through my hair like a baptism. Alan was gone. My mother was still a ghost in living form. But me, I was more alive than I'd ever been. I was wrapping up the final stop of my second book tour. A small private venue in Portland, intimate lighting, velvet chairs, and a crowd that felt more like a circle of survivors than an audience. I had just finished reading the last passage of Brave Girls Don't Always Scream when I saw her. Back row. Hair gray at the temples now. Jaw still tight, but thinner, smaller. My mother. She didn't clap. Of course not. She sat with her hands in her lap, expression unreadable, eyes locked on me like I was a crime scene she still didn't believe in. I felt the air shift around me. People whispered. A few recognized her from that photo, the one that went viral after the awards ceremony of her walking out while the president shook my hand. I knew the cameras were there that night too, not a massive crew. Just a small feature for a local docuseries on women writers. I hadn't planned on anything dramatic. But that's the thing about truth. It shows up whether you want it to or not. After the reading, I stood near the signing table, heart pounding as she approached. Not a smile, not a nod. Just that same stare she used to give me at age 10, when I forgot to vacuum the stairs. I read both books, she said. My pen paused in the middle of signing someone else's copy. And, you made yourself the hero, she muttered, eyes darting toward the people forming a polite semicircle nearby. No, I said calmly. I made myself visible, that's not the same. Her mouth tightened. She leaned in, voice lower. Do you know what it's like to walk through your town and see people look at you like you're some kind of monster? I tilted my head. Yes, I do. Silence. We stared at each other. 2 versions of the same DNA, both bruised in different ways. Finally, she whispered he wasn't who I thought he was. My breath caught. But then she added, and neither were you. And there it was. Not an apology. Not remorse. Just another weapon in the shape of a sentence. She turned and walked out just like she had that day in D.C. But this time the cameras caught everything. The stillness. The tension. My silence. And when the footage aired, the moment went viral. But not because she humiliated me. Because I didn't flinch. Because I stood there grounded in unbroken proof that silence doesn't win, not when truth has a spine. The clip was shared under a new hashtag. She didn't flinch. And that night, as I sat in my hotel room, wine glass in hand, watching the world bear witness, I finally let myself feel what I had never dared to before. Pride, not because I'd won, but because I hadn't walked away from myself this time. The call came 6 months later. I was in my new apartment, a sun-drenched place with real windows, hardwood floors, and a lemon tree I somehow hadn't killed yet. No leaks, no mold, just peace. I was folding laundry when the phone rang. The number had too many zeros to be real. At first I thought it was spam, but then a calm, authoritative voice came on the line. "This is the office of the President of the United States. Is this Miss Eliza Harrow?" My legs went weak. I sat on the floor with a half-folded towel in my lap. They were calling to ask if I would accept the National Medal of Arts for literary courage and cultural impact. I didn't speak for a full 10 seconds. Not because I was speechless, but because something inside me cracked quietly like ice under pressure. Not a breakdown, not even joy. Just release. The ceremony would be small, they said. Private. A short televised segment. I could invite 3 guests. 3. I invited Lee, my editor, the woman who bet on me before anyone else did. I invited Malcolm, who'd come back to town 6 months earlier with a soft apology and a sturdier heart. And the 3rd? I left blank. Not because I didn't know who to ask, but because I needed that space to remember the girl who sat in the dark, who didn't pull her hand away, who burned her own drawings, who believed her mother when she said she was average. I needed to honor her. She deserved a seat more than anyone else. The night of the ceremony, I wore navy blue, the exact shade of my old high school uniform. Not for nostalgia, for reclamation. When they called my name this time, I walked calmly to the stage. No shaking hands, no racing heartbeat. Just the weight of every truth I had ever spoken, pressing into my spine like a crown. The applause was thunderous. But this time I wasn't searching for her face in the crowd. She wasn't there. She didn't need to be. Because I didn't write those books to make her see me. I wrote them so I could see me, fully, finally. And now, standing under chandeliers and cameras and polished smiles, I wasn't just visible. I was unshakable. Because when the president handed me that medal and said, "Your courage helped countless women find their voices," I didn't cry. I smiled. And whispered inside my chest, "This is what not average looks like." It was a panel at Columbia packed with young writers, journalists, and survivors who were becoming storytellers because the world hadn't listened the first time. A moderator leaned forward and said, "Eliza, what would you say to your younger self if you could go back?" The room went still. I knew the question would come. It always did. But this time, I didn't default to the polished lines I'd practiced. No metaphors, no quotes, no clever phrases. Just honesty. I looked into the crowd and said, I'd tell her that one day someone would try to name her with shame, but she'd rename herself with fire. A few people nodded. One young woman in the second row began to cry silently, hand over her mouth, like she'd just heard a secret she'd buried too long. I continued. I'd tell her, "You'll want love so badly you'll mistake attention for safety. You'll believe the people who say it's your fault. You'll try to disappear in quiet ways, but one day you'll learn how to scream on paper, and the world will finally listen." I paused, then added, "And when they do, you won't be average, you'll be dangerous." The crowd erupted, not in polite claps. In tears, in cheers, in the sound of people standing up for themselves through the act of standing up for me. After the event, I stayed for 2 hours, signing books, hugging women, listening to stories that felt like echoes of my own. One girl handed me a folded napkin with a note. "You made me feel less alone. Now I want to do that for someone else." That was the legacy. Not the award, not the interviews, not even the books. But the chain reaction of truth, the wildfire of voices that lit each other up. That night, back in my apartment, I lit a single vanilla candle and placed it on my desk, an act of reclamation. I opened a new document. Title: Average Girls Burn Brightest. And for the first time in my life, I didn't write from pain. I wrote from power. Because my story, the one my mother tried to bury, the one Alan pretended wasn't real, the one the world tried to soften, had become something bigger. A mirror, a map, a matchstick. And I knew deep in my marrow that no one could ever make me disappear again. Not quietly. Not ever.